Tonight, we have Natali Bravo Barbee joining us as our speaker. So we're really excited to welcome her tonight. She's an artist whose work bridges the boundaries of photography and sculpture via installation art. And she processes the world around her using photography and incorporates processes like cyanotype into her practice. And without further ado, I'll keep it brief and turn it right over to Natali.
Thank you so much, Dale. And I just wanted to acknowledge how amazing all those classes sound. And I'm jealous that I'm not closer because I want to take all of them. And even I'm definitely, maybe as the weather gets a little warmer, I'm going to be taking a day trip to Philly and stopping by. And so if we're ready to jump in, I can share my screen and begin talking. So I just want to take a moment to thank everyone that's here this evening. I know it's been a long day for a lot of us, and it means so much to me that you've taken time out of your night to come in here and watch a little bit about my work. And I'll introduce myself. I'm Natali Bravo Barbee, and I'm a New York-based artist. And I've been working with photography for 25 years, and I've gone through the motions on what kind of work I've done. But I'm going to limit this presentation to work that started what I'm currently investigating. And so I've done a lot of, I used to do school portrait photography, I've done sports photography, and I always felt like something just kind of lacked in my own work. And so I began the MFA program in 2014 at the City College of New York. And when I started that program, I had this really amazing sculpture professor, and he had seen something in my portfolio that led him to believe that I was interested in three-dimensional work. And then that's where my current process was born. So I'll begin showing some of the work, some of my older work, and into some of my newer work, and then I'll end with the current work that I'm making at the moment. And so when I started at the MFA program, I was really struggling with what it meant to make images. I was making tiny little images that you can hold in your hand, but I wanted to do something more. I wanted to take up more space. And in the MFA program, they give you your own studio for 2 years, of whatever the length of the program is. And so having that space dedicated to my artwork changed the way I made work. Before, in my apartment in New York, I was just kind of scaled down and making work that can just easily be filed away in a filing cabinet. And I was just making prints and putting them away. And so then I started thinking about how I've always struggled with the way that I present my work, because framing is expensive and it also separates the viewer from interacting with the image. So I started making photo-based installations. And it took me a while to really come up with how to phrase what I do. I take photography and then I make immersive experiences with them. And then how do you call that? What do you call it? And so photo-based installation. And in 2015, I was introduced to the world of alternative process. One of the undergrad classes that were being taught there was on alternative process, and I wanted to take it. So I took on the challenge of adding an extra course onto my workload to learn everything that I could about making images with my hands that weren't necessarily just darkening based. And so I started playing with dolls, life-size dolls, mannequins, and prints, and seeing how they can interact and talk with each other, and how I can get my concepts across. So I was playing a lot with the idea of memory and trying to discover how to use relics from my life and my history to make prints. And so I started making these, incorporating my own clothing. In the previous one, it's my baptism dress. In the background, the cyanotype is of my my baptism gloves and the rosary that was given to me by my grandfather. And so these were things that I was discovering all over again that were hidden in my closet. And so I started considering how objects and clothing and just retain memory, and how do I get those memories out, and how do I share them in a way that a viewer can interact with them in a certain way, by walking around them, by exploring and investigating them further. And so I was playing with light gels to change the way that a light hit the parasol, and how shadows played in with the installation, lighting, all the things that we think about and consider as photographers. And so I kept on investigating, thinking about ways to display my work. And then I continued playing with scale, and also where can I show my works. If it's light sensitive and cyanotypes they change with the weather outside, can I take a print, photograph it, and then print it on a different substrate, and then have that hang outside? And how does that work? How can I help people experience my work in a way that's different than what you would normally expect to see with photography? And so I've made installations where it's just accessible and out to the public and not precious. And then that leads me to my largest project, and one that is really near and dear to me. This is called the Flores de Femicidio. It's the femicide florals. I began making this project in 2019. I had read an article about a woman that had been asking for help, and she didn't get the help that she needed, and she was murdered by a man 1 block from the police station. And it hit me, it struck a chord with me, because I knew very well what it's like to ask for help and to not receive it initially, but then finally get the help that I needed. And I felt like I could tell a story from a place that considers all the delicate matters that deal with domestic violence. It's really touchy subject, and it's hard to do in a respectful way. And so I began thinking about how do I honor these women, and how do I create a concept that's strong enough to tell this story. And then that's where the prototype flower was born. In January 2019, I started going into making botanical prints. And I had vowed that I wouldn't do a botanical print unless it was meaningful, because I feel like when we start off with cyanotype, it's the first thing that everybody does. It's, making, after Anna Atkins, everybody makes botanical prints and inspired by her work. So I told myself, I'm not going to make botanical prints unless they're meaningful. And so when I started thinking about I had already the concept, but I didn't have the process. And what I was going to do. And so I thought, well, what if I use botanicals to make botanicals? And I like playing with ideas, three-dimensional ideas that way. And so that's where this one was born. And so I was so excited about my find, and I was like, I have to publish it out there, and I have to put it out before someone else. I know how the collective consciousness works, and people have these same ideas, and there's this kind of rush to get the work out. So I was like, I'm going to just kind of test the waters and see if this project can hold its weight, because it's going to be a really big investment of time, resources, and energy, emotional energy. And so I began the task of building the installation. And so I'm going to show you the behind the scenes of what it took to make this large installation. This installation is made of 327 individual cyanotype paper flowers. There's also 13 plaques, one that has the year. You'll see it here on the upper left corner. It says 2019. And then on the bottom, there's plaques that say the months of the year. So this is essentially a large calendar that marks 1 year of femicides in Argentina. And Argentina is where I was born. So that's why it was the place that I needed to look into. And so each of the flowers start off with 22 by 30 watercolor paper, where I had templates of flowers that I had purchased from a designer. And they sent me these templates, and I began tracing each petal. And so I came up with my own kind of Dewey Decimal System to be able to keep track of these petals so I can reassemble them. And so once the petals were cut, then they had to be sorted in a way that I could go through little by little and work on them. And so this is what my filing system looked like. Each one of those Ziploc bags contains one flower. So as time went by, I would go and I would pull out one Ziploc bag and all the petals, and then I would begin coating them. And each petal was coated individually. And then when I talk about the process, some people say, well, wasn't it easier to just coat the entire sheet and expose it and then cut it out? And that would be easier, but it wouldn't have given me the results that I wanted. I needed to frame each petal the way I would a photograph. I had to center the flowers that I was using or the lace that I was using. And so each one of them was done individually. And so here you see, I've used some live flowers picked from my garden, some I purchased, some were given to me. And coating that many petals took up a lot of space. And it also took a lot of help. I was heavily pregnant when in the middle of this project, I became pregnant, and I made 1.5 children in the time that it took me to complete the project. And so I had to learn what it meant to continue with this project, but still also incorporate the new challenges of motherhood. So luckily, I received a grant from the Queen's Council on the Arts that allowed me to hire help. So I had someone help me with cutting. I had someone help me come and assist me with coding, and all the exposing I did, I needed to have that kind of control myself. But then developing, I also did myself, but then the sorting, we did a lot of the sorting together. We did a lot of assembling together, and just going through the motions of folding petals and shaping them. But all of these, every single petal that was exposed, for me, it had to be really, it felt important to be the one that took that photo. And so this is my UV exposure box, and this is how I've made a lot of my petals. I've exposed a lot of my prints. The larger ones I expose out in the garden, and when the weather's good, I will also take them out and put them on the table outside and work with them outdoors. But most of my work was done at night when everyone was asleep. So I was exposing these long 30 to 45-minute exposures per batch. And so then I go through the motions of developing the images once they've been exposed, and rinsing them in water, then setting them out to dry. And then that is a challenge in itself, because I'm doing all this while I also have a baby in the house, and I'm also going through my chores and tasks that I have to do every day. And so I had to incorporate like making dinner and also developing prints. And that's what it looks like in my kitchen. I'm just laying out batches that I've exposed as they come along and going through, moving forward with the project while still just living everyday life.
Mhm.
Folding petals, the petals, it didn't just go from developing to just assembling. Each petal had to be folded while it was still wet so that the watercolor paper was malleable and didn't wrinkle or crease, but rather it had this beautiful shape to it. And all of that required then wetting the paper again or doing it while it was still moist. Then the assembling and figuring out, how do I glue all this stuff together? How do I get it to stay? And then I have these ugly kind of centers. What do I do? How do I solve this problem with to make these flowers look polished and finished? And so then I go into a little bit of how I work. And so now you've seen the process of drawing the petals and making the flowers, but there's also sketches that go into all my work. Every single installation that I make always starts off as a sketch in my sketchbook. And I write notes for myself and ask myself questions and things to tackle and keep in mind while I'm making the work. And I try to, sometimes the space is limited, so I try to solve problems that might arise with when I do install them, and how do I install them, and how do I fill a space, and am I being too redundant with this shapes, with this, with how many prints I'm making, what lace I'm using. So a lot of those questions, but also just documenting my process and how I work. It helps me when I look back and do talks like this to really understand how I work. And so here's one for scale on some of the flowers. When you're looking at that installation in the rooms, I get a lot of questions. Well, how big are, what's the biggest and what's the smallest one? What's the scale? You can't tell. So this is just one of the average size flowers and my hand. And so this was my studio space, actually, where I'm talking to you from right now, or talking with you right now. And so this is before the space filled up. I actually ran out of room in my studio. And as the process grew, the space, I realized the space wasn't going to be enough. So these flowers spilled out into the house, into my living space. And every day we'd have breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the table, and I'd be surrounded by my work. And it just kind of kept the pressure on to continue the work and finish it and see it through. And so each of the flowers has a label on it. And the labels, most of the labels have actual names from the women that each flower represents. A woman that was murdered by a man in 2019. So in order to keep all of the information together and the systems that I had to develop to be able to organize everything, I had to then also make negatives with their names that I would expose. And so there's the text, and you see this one bag contains the names of all the women that were the names that were available from my research of all the women that had been murdered in January of 2019. And so there's a bag like this for the entire year. Every month has the names on them. Some of them are just only a couple of names because many of those murders went unsolved, and more than half of the installation is actually no names because they know that it was a woman that had been murdered by a man, but there was no investigation or nobody claimed the woman. And so they tallied her up and said, oh, we had a femicide, but this is it. We know that it was done by a man, but we don't have a name, and she hasn't been claimed or identified. And so, but I still felt that it was necessary to represent those women. And so these are the tags. The shape of them was inspired by body tags, and I had to sign the back of every single one to make sure that I accounted for every single tag that was made and signing the work. And so this is a big batch of the no names. Is when I made all the flowers first, and then I went through and made the tags that were attached to each of the flowers. Um, and I tallied up how many women it was and how many tags I had to make. I felt like this was such a powerful moment to photograph all the tags with the no names, no nombre in Spanish, and that's how they label them, just femicide and no name. When I talked about before trying to figure out how to polish off the centers of these flowers, I tried, and I have each of many of the flowers have similar centers, but I also learned what it's like to mass produce some work. And so I found foam balls, and I wanted these textured ones, and then I had to cut them and I had to paint them, and it wasn't as much fun as I have doing the photo element and the photo aspect of them. There's also non-photographic parts that are incorporated into this project, and that's the centers. I also, like I mentioned, there's plaques in them, and these I had to make large negatives for these. I had to make sure that I found a way to incorporate the language from my country, from Argentina, in Spanish and in English, and make it representative for everyone that can. And I didn't want to exclude by only putting it in Spanish, but I also didn't want to leave out the important element of the country. So I figured out that this was the best way to represent both sides. And so here are some of my favorite pictures of some of these flowers. Here you can see how the water paper holds this curve, and that for me was just so important to make these botanicals feel more natural and more real, was adding the dimensions of the contours and the way that a flower naturally opens up and blossoms. So this one has a glass center. They were just flat back glass stones that I painted to give the look that I wanted for these centers. I had to test different glues because they'd fall apart. It would be at home, and then all of a sudden I'd find a stone on the ground and I'd realize, oh, that glue didn't work. But all of the photograms they all changed as time went by because the flowers would disintegrate. When I'd use the UV exposure unit and the vacuum would tighten up, as the flowers dried, they would start to crumble, and they changed the negatives. And so they all changed and they all looked different. I loved showing the brushstrokes to let the viewer know that there's a hand in here, that as nice as they look and as pristine as they could be, they were hand coated, they were painted, it wasn't printed. And I love that about cyanotype, how it lends itself for that painterly quality. And just clusters of flowers as they grew, and they were just so pretty on their own, but I knew that they needed more, and those tags for me was what it needed. And so here is the first time I installed the entire show. As time went by, let me just look at the time. As time went by, I had been showing little bits of, like, 1 month, January 2019, I had been showing those clusters of the flowers, but I needed to show the entire installation, and that happened in September of 2021 at the York College Fine Arts Gallery here in Jamaica, Queens. And it was really important for me to start and show this work in my hometown right here in Jamaica and Queens. And so this was the gallery, and this is, if you'll see on the right side, these fresh direct bags. that is how I store these flowers on the entire installation. About 35 of those bags hold and nestle these flowers, and that makes it that I can fit the entire installation in my Jeep and take it to the location where it needs to be installed. I know at some point I'm going to have to change how I store them, but for now, that that will do. But that has given me the name of the crazy bag lady when I show up to install my work. And so this was the first time that I was dealing with finally seeing the entire installation, and how we needed to lay it out and how that was going to look. So we're working with the plaques. I didn't know where I wanted the plaques to be shown, whether on the top or in the middle, or how that was going to happen. And luckily, the curator, Dr. Margaret Rose Vendries, she came and she's like, well, how about we just do these on the bottom? Like, and I loved it so much that that's usually how I show them now. I put them on the bottom, and you can walk around and see the flowers, but then you can look down, and you can tell which month you're in. And then you realize you're walking through a calendar. And so this is the final install. Took us, I think, 3.5 days, that first installation, to get them all up and spaced out properly. And then from showing them at York College in September of 2021, then in March of 2022, I showed them in Manhattan through an organization called Shashama, and they gave me the space to present. And then I hung these all by myself during one day, less than 3 months postpartum. And it was probably one of the most intense days, but it had to be done. And I have to continue talking about violence against women. And the best way to do it is by continuously showing the work and creating a space, a safe space to have these conversations. And so Shashama was so wonderful, and they gave me the space for a month, and it was just a wonderful experience. I highly recommend them if you're in New York to see what they can offer. Then the third installation was at the Mattituck Museum. I think that was February of 2023. And I loved it because they painted this wall to match the flowers, and it blew my mind. I loved how that wall looked, and how the white wall and the blue wall resemble the white and the blue from the cyanotypes on the flowers. And so that brings me to the current installation that's up at Red Bank in Gallery Lucida. It's a new gallery that opened up, and it's been wonderful installing it. This one took me 3 days to install also, by myself, and it allows me a control. And I feel like photographers, we tend to be control freaks, so we like to control our lights and how our shots are made. And I think with installation, it lends itself for that as well, and it gives me that control to go to a place and say, I'm going to take over, and this is how I want them displayed. I won't always have that case with the museum. The museum was in charge of that, and I know when to let go. But there was also groundwork and some framework that I laid out for how it had to be installed. And so some of the other ways that I show my flowers when space is limited is I can take them outdoors. I did an outdoor installation of a paper flower and many petals and labels out at the Queen's Botanical Garden during the pandemic. I make these kind of assemblage pieces of them. I made this one, is actually my largest flower to date. It's 3 feet by 3 feet and about 4 inches wide, deep. That's the one that's hanging behind me. And this one is a satellite that I did of the femicide florals. And all these flowers are no names, but when I only have a small space to show, I go and I take a small cluster of flowers and I make a design for it, and I make them still accessible. I don't want to not be able to talk about it just because they don't have a lot of space. And so then that leads me to one of my recent projects where I then went from big flowers to little tiny florets and making these large silhouette prints inspired by the artist Ana Mendieta. And her death is controversial because some people say it's femicide, that she was murdered by her husband. Other people say he was acquitted and it wasn't proven. So innocent until proven guilty, which I heard and read a lot during my research on femicides. And that happens more often than not, that men go unpunished for the murder of women. And so I made this installation piece called Seance. And that outline between the silhouette and the candles, those are all these tiny little cyanotype florets that I've been making. So I think it was like 180 of them it took to make. So I want to show a little something that I'm working on now. And this is just to show that even though I talk a lot about cyanotype and my alternative process work, I also still make lens-based work, and I still do remember my origins of my camera work. And I've been working on this project called Cocoon. In Spanish is Capullo. And it's about motherhood and my experience with motherhood, and a very traumatic journey into motherhood and the birth of my daughter and what that looks like. I think that the couple of months postpartum from when birth starts to once things kind of the dust settles, it's just this precious little quiet moment of a cocoon, and that was my experience. And so I documented it and showed it, and now I'm trying to organize it, and it'll be shown in March at Queens College. And so I talk about what it's like, and figuring out motherhood and my work and my processes. And sometimes it means there's my babies around and photographs, and they're kind of together, and I'm entertaining one while still keeping my eye on the project and reminding myself what I need to be doing and multitasking. And so that's what I'm working on at the moment. And um, I'm accessible. I love talking shop. I love looking at people's work. I love talking photography, installation, art in general. And so if you want to talk, reach out. Mostly Instagram is the best way to contact me. And I appreciate you being here. And I think we're ready to open up for some questions, Dad.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Natalie. That was amazing. Um, People can put questions in the chat if they want. There's also the raise hand function if you want to actually ask the question with your voice instead of typing it out. You could do that, and then I'll allow your mic to be turned on. So whichever way you want to do it, feel free. If you have a question or even a comment. So I will get a transcript of the chat, and I'll share it with Natalie. So if there's something you want to share with her that's not necessarily a question, but a comment, feel free to put that in the chat as well. But if people have questions, I'll start off. I have a technical question. So how are the flowers affixed to the wall?
So they have a wire, the same wire that we use for framing. I create little loops from that and then glue those onto the back.
Okay. Yeah, I love
And
the
they're
way
pretty light.
yeah, I mean, they look like they're floating. So it's a very, I don't know, it's a beautiful way to display them. And like without the distraction of like the framing. Although the ones that you have individually framed, those are very powerful too, but seeing the whole extent of them all sort of floating off the wall is very powerful, especially the full year installation. Just the sheer number of them is like incredibly powerful. Um, and I was thinking too, when you were mentioning like your incorporation of the tags, and the pieces themselves individually are so beautiful that I feel like the tags sort of bring you back from that beauty to the reality of what the project is about. As does, like, again, the like sheer number of them. Stepping into a space like that and seeing that number, it's like heartbreaking. So
Absolutely. And I struggled with that idea when I was showing them, and there was a curator was looking at it, and she's like, "That's such a pretty flower."
mm,
And then when I told her what it meant, and she's like, "Well, I didn't need to know all that." And then I thought, well,
mm,
yes, you do. That's the whole
mhm.
point. I don't want to just make something that's pretty. I want it to be educational and raise awareness. And so that's where I was convinced that the tags were essential to it. In a sense that they take away from it, but it brings you to the core of the project, the concept of it, and the reality.
Yeah, well, and I think that that's the tricky part, is that the beauty of it is someone can appreciate the beauty of it, but if they don't want to know what it's about, then they're kind of not getting the whole impetus behind the project and the seriousness of what you're trying to address with your work. So it's important that like you bring it from simply a beautiful object to like the serious message behind it. Yeah. We do have some questions and comments. Yeah, so Amy, I'm gonna start with a comment. Amy saying breathtakingly beautiful and at the same time takes my breath away. No name tags. Hits very close to home for me. Yeah, and that's another, like the fact that you're incorporating the unidentified in it and giving them a name by using no name. I think that's hugely important too. So those people who are not identified are still getting recognized in the work that you're doing. Um, Janae has a question. She's wondering, what was your favorite, fresh or dried flora to work with?
I think they both gave different results. The dried ones became more translucent and gave more detail to the prints, but the fresh ones held their shape better. They were stronger, and so they can withhold the vacuum seal from the exposure unit better. But as time went by, they then became dry flowers, and so they went from fresh to dry.
Um, Marta has a kind of a comment. Amazing and intense on so many levels, such special, powerful, and meaningful work. It must be such an experience to be in the gallery surrounded by the flowers, names, and no names. The contrast of seeing beautiful objects about something so tragic. Yes, it does raise awareness. And yeah, I agree. Like I haven't seen the work in person, but I can only imagine stepping into that gallery. I think I would like, yes, like someone said it was breathtaking and takes your breath away. I feel like I would have that experience walking into the gallery and just seeing the numbers, just overwhelming, but very important. Um, Linda's wondering if you chose particular flowers to represent the women.
So I did. I made all the flowers, and then, well, when I made January, I was making them for particular women. But as when I first started the project, I thought I was going to be making these flowers in real time, and not realizing it takes me 8 to 10 hours to make a flower. And then one woman was being murdered every 27 hours. and it just wasn't realistic of me to think that I was going to be able to keep up. So I then started making all the flowers at once. But when I was picking the labels, when I had made the tags and I was picking a flower to them, I would look back and think about the woman, and I would look at her name, and all their stories are ingrained in my mind. So I would look at the name and I would then pick a flower for her, the way I would pick it for one of my ancestors or one of my loved ones.
I mean, that statistic alone is like incredibly, I don't know the right adjective, but you know, that every 27 hours, like you just couldn't keep up with the volume is
Yeah.
anyway, that's yeah, that is very affecting. Um, John, I see that you have your hand up, but you also put something in the chat. Sorry that I didn't get to your hand sooner, but quickly just put in the chat if you want us to go off the chat question or if you want to turn on your mic, because we could do either. Turn on mic. Okay, so I'm gonna give John mic. Right, you should be able to now.
Hi there, Natalie. Great presentation. Wonderful to see the work in all these incarnations. And so, my question is, well, one of my many questions, but I'll start with this. So, how has this been experienced by women who've been through domestic violence? Have they, have they shared their experiences? I imagine some women have become very emotional. How has that been for you? And for well, how's your experience of that been?
Thank you, John, for your question, and thank you for attending tonight. John is a dear friend, and every time I show the work, the goal is always to create a safe space for this conversation. If obviously there's a lot of domestic violence survivors, and that means that there's a lot of trauma that needs to be processed. And the best way to process that is by creating a safe space and an environment for people to feel compelled to share their stories. So every time I've shown the work, I have had, if not multiple women, come and tell me their stories of survivorship and how they endured it and how important it is to be making this work and talking about it and raising awareness and also sharing resources on how to help domestic violence victims. And the thing is, chances are we all know someone that's struggling with something like this. And I talk about it very gender-based. These are femicides, but I also need to acknowledge that domestic violence isn't only from a man to a woman. There are a lot of cases where it's the other way around. But the majority of it happens from being overpowered by a gender. And so I share resources with this, but my experience has been really emotional. Women that have experienced domestic violence and that have survived it, they get very emotional when they see the work because they know that if they hadn't gotten help, they could have been one of those flowers on the wall. Mm. And so I'm often thanked for doing the work and for sharing it in such a respectable and respectful way to these women, where it's not just trying to get a 5-minute kind of fame off of the topic, but really genuinely caring about it and coming from a place of understanding as a survivor myself. And so thank you, John, for your question.
Thank you,
You're welcome.
Natalie. Carlos has a couple questions. He says that your latest project is focused on digital photography. Are you putting on hold the florals project, or will you work on both of them simultaneously? And also, have you found any connections between both projects?
So my current work, it is digital it was shot with my iPhone, but I needed to find the way that I can still have my hand in it. And so the way that they're printed, I print these images as you see them here on the carpet in my living room. They're printed on instant film through the Instax wide printer. That was my primary camera for many years. And so I was shooting these one-off instant images. And so when I think about the work that I'm making now, I needed to have that analog element to it, even though it's digital. So putting it through this kind of processor where then it spits out an image and I still watch it develop before my eyes. That was an important part, and it was very intentional when I thought about how I'm going to print these and show them. And so I see motherhood as just these kind of glimpses of moments that just pass, and I document. And so when I show these and when I'm going to show them, I'm working on making these kind of like little windows that you look at. And I feel like that's what the memory is. As days go by, they just become blurs and little windows that I remember of that time in my body. But I'm thinking about, I'm still working on the flowers. I'm still working on making these little florets actually now. And I'm still processing and making work about femicides and using the symbol of the flower, the cyanotype paper flower. And that I work on, but also both of these projects, they have emotional tolls. One of them is really emotional and psychologically heavy, just reading these horrendous stories. But then I also have to be a mother, and I have to be present and really document and take in these moments. But then also they pass, and then in hindsight, that motherhood is just such a heavy topic in itself. So trying to balance both of them. I'm still, when one becomes too heavy, I move on to the other one. And motherhood is heavy, but it's also very pleasurable in the sense of I have these beautiful little images of my children that I get to look at, and they might not mean anything to anyone else, but to me they do. And so I still continue making it and thinking about how to share it, but still being respectful of my kids too, and their they don't have a voice to say I want to be shown on the internet. So I don't really show, if you haven't attended a talk or you don't know me personally, you really don't know I have kids, because I don't show that on my social media.
Well, thanks for sharing so much with us tonight with both projects and just your personal relationship with both as well. It's very, very important and kind of honored that you have chosen to share that with us here. So thank you.
Thank you, Jael, for having me. I wanted to also acknowledge a little bit of the inspiration, the artistic inspirations behind the femicide floral work. When I was doing my undergrad at Hunter College, I went and I saw Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party. And I was so blown away by the fact that this artist got the Brooklyn Museum to give her a space designated just for this huge installation. And that never left my mind. It was so powerful. And I thought about that, and I put a pin on it and as inspiration, but many years passed by. And then when I started working with cyanotypes and thinking about three-dimensional objects, I started looking at the work of Annie Lopez and her cyanotype dresses. I was blown away by that. I had been already working with dresses in my installations and my cyanotype-based installations. So seeing this person, this artist crafting these beautiful dresses out of like tamal paper and printing on them, it was just phenomenal. And then I had also seen this beautiful installation, or it was in the works by this Queens-based artist, Diana Bejarano, who did this project, really meaningful project on domestic violence and also the Murder of Brides. I think it was called like the White Dress series. And I was blown away by how thoughtful and how emotional that project was and how much research went into making that. And so when I talk about it, I like to you know, give credit where credit is due. These are the women that have inspired the work, that have informed the work. We look at so much work and we take so much away from it, but we don't give credit when it's due. And so I wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you. If you open your chat, could you plug some of the names of the artists who you just mentioned in there?
Sure.
I know that some of them were familiar. Annie Lopez did one of our talks earlier, and looking at your work, I was immediately thinking like, oh, I'd love to put a show together of their work.
Oh my goodness, that would be a dream. I would fangirl so hard.
Oh. But I wasn't familiar with that last artist. You said it was the White Dress series. Could you put her name in there too? Because that's not work that I'm familiar with, and I'd love to check it out.
I might be misspelling her last name. Let me just give it a quick look
Sure.
so that I can get it.
Thanks for mentioning your inspiration as well.
I feel like it's important to talk about these things. Something that I'm currently dealing with is plagiarism and appropriation. And an artist took the concept for the femicide florals and appropriated it into their work and got a lot of play out of that. They hadn't been doing the work. They did a really lazy job at taking my work and my words and using them off as their own. Visually, they didn't do it the same exact way, but conceptually, it's the same exact thing. And so later on this week, there's going to be an article coming out about where I was interviewed about plagiarism and appropriation in the art world and how damaging that can be for artists.
Can people, if they're following you on Instagram, will you post like a link to the article once it's live?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's going to be published in the next day or two. So definitely, if you follow me, Barbie Bravo, which is actually my name backwards. Someone else had Bravo Barbie, so I had to flip it, and it confused a lot of people. But it's at Barbie _ Bravo, and that's where I'll be sharing a lot of it. And yeah, I look forward to hearing thoughts on it, and kind of, I feel like that's taboo in the art world, and I like to tackle things that are hard to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the artist's job, right? All right, does anybody else have questions or comments? Remember, you could put comments in too. If you don't have a question, I'll share the chat with Natali afterwards. So anything you want to share with her, and you're welcome, Marta. Thank you for coming. Thanks everybody for coming tonight, and Natali especially, thank you so much. This work is incredibly important and powerful and difficult and beautiful and everything rolled into one. So thank you so much for sharing with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about my work and share it, and having these conversations be accessible virtually. Clearly, people can show up and attend them from all over the world. And as a parent, I know now that that's just so important. I like supporting other artists, but it's hard for me to always leave my house on Thursday nights or Friday nights to go to openings. And so this is a way that makes things accessible for people.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. We hope to see you somewhere in person at Halide or at one of our talks in the future. And thank you so much for taking the time to come out tonight.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.